Hi, everyone. Welcome in. We're going to go ahead and jump right in. My name is Kellen Lovell. I'm the Director of Strategy and Operations for the Purposeful Growth Institute, which is a nonprofit partner of the National Park Service Business Plan Internship. And I'm really excited to be sharing a conversation with you between two of our just incredible BPI alum who have forged really meaningful careers in a for-profit space. And so I'm excited to introduce them to you. We have Lisa Yao, who is joining us from Google, and I'll let her tell a little bit more about her role there, as well as Amie Fleming, who is with Quantified Ventures, both doing really incredible things after their internship. So let's start with you, Amie. If you could tell us first where you did your project and a little bit about it, and then what you're doing now.
Yeah, hello everybody. Amie Fleming. I did my project at Grand Canyon during my internship summer during business school. While I was at Grand Canyon, we were doing an evaluation of backpacking operations and kind of permitting strategy, special use permit, just to see what kind of impact private backpacking companies had on, accessibility of permits and backpacking in Grand Canyon. And I can't remember if there's a second part to your question already. So
yeah, that's okay. It is. We've already worked all day, so I totally understand. The second part of the question was a little bit more about what you're doing now, and we'll dive into some of the nuances of that, but just maybe a brief overview of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Just breaking the ice for everyone after work. I currently work at Quantified Ventures. We are a firm that's based in DC, but work nationwide. And we really work on designing, capitalizing, and scaling impactful projects across the country. I work in our environment and resilience team. So my project areas really focus for me within forestry and land use, big partnership with the Forest Service. But we also do work in social determinants of health. And then within the environment space, we do a lot of work in water, both on water quality issues and a lot of water management, flood and drought, as well as a really wide variety of areas, but using finance and consulting as tools to help solve those problems.
That's fantastic. Lisa, what about you?
Yeah, so I'm Lisa. I interned at the BPI in 2019. I did a joint degree at the Harvard Kennedy School and Business School, so both on the policy side and on the business school side. And I'm currently based in SF and work at Google as a product strategy lead in our advertising business. So for my internship summer, I was based out of Harpers Ferry National Historic Park. It's located in West Virginia. Most people haven't heard of it, but it's the place where if you ever visit a park and see the brochures and visitor centers and waypoints, all of those are designed and contracted out of the Harpers Ferry Center. And we worked on two different projects. One was a budgeting strategy or budgeting revamp and looking at how we're costing our projects to do it more rigorously in a more standardized way, and to figure out if we were overcosting or undercosting different media projects. And the second one was we worked on developing a 5-year HR strategy for the org. As you know, at the parks, there's a lot of predictability into when personnel would be eligible to retire or not. And a huge proportion of the center was due to retire in the next 5 years. And so we were thinking about what type of backfill we would hire and how that aligns to the strategic plans of the organization. Yeah. And then, sorry, should I give an overview?
You got them both. Super interesting projects, and I can already think of some questions that I have, but one that I was thinking about specifically, and I'll direct this to you first, Lisa, and then back to you, Amie, because Lisa, you were kind of doing both policy and business in school. Did you plan or hope to pursue a career in the for-profit sector, or maybe you were open to a lot of different possibilities based on that educational trajectory, and what kind of moved you in a particular direction?
Yeah, I think the for-profit and nonprofit, for-profit, I mean, not necessarily nonprofit, but the impact sector have both been very important to me. Before business school, I started off my career in management consulting, so very for-profit, and then spent a couple of years at the World Bank, so very impact oriented. I think and hope I'll be bridging both of those sectors for the rest of my life. It was a tough decision to figure out where to go into after school, and there were a lot of personal as well as like professional factors that led to the ultimate decision. I decided to come and work at Google for several reasons. One is I wanted to move back out to the West Coast. I'm from here, my family's here, and this was a good way to get out to San Francisco. Second of all, I thought that the training in the private sector is fairly focused, and I think working on a market-facing role would help me kind of accelerate my strategic skills, my organizational skills, and that would be something that I would want to bring into any aspect of my life. That being said, having impact as part of my career is something I didn't want to lose. So I'm actually deeply involved in one nonprofit, and I've been starting an engagement with another nonprofit. So one organization I work with outside of work is called Western Rivers Conservancy, and they work to conserve and protect land that is near threatened waterways, and they do that by acquiring the land and then turning it over to management by sometimes national entities. So the U.S. Forest Service is one organization that manages the land after, as well a lot of like local and state governments. So state of Oregon, state of California, and sometimes city governments and tribes as well. So I'm on a advisory committee for the organization and run fundraising for them, help with donor engagement. And then I'm also involved in launching their digital advertising strategy and also operations. So I think like the key takeaway here is I don't think you need to necessarily make a hard trade-off between environmental impact and for-profit versus nonprofit. I think there's many ways to get involved. And yeah. And then, sorry, I just like mentioned the second organization. This is like a new thing that happened this month. I started working with a conservation organization that's based out of Namibia, and they're similarly trying to protect and rewild land that houses a lot of critical species, including black rhinos. So working with them on marketing and pitches for their value proposition, and then also fundraising strategy. Yeah.
That's fantastic. And I love that you point out that there is that the sectors are maybe not as distinct as they used to be, which probably is music to your ears, Amie, in the space that you occupy. What's your kind of, what was your decision-making process as you finished your degree and moved on and made a decision? What did that look like for you in terms of choosing a sector or an impact area, as Lisa defined it?
Yeah, I had nonprofit experience before business school. So I was actually working in San Francisco in land use planning and advocacy work on the fundraising side of the house. So, similar skills to everything Lisa was just talking about. Really loved it, but was working a lot with their board of directors and was like, these are people who are steering this organization, and they are lawyers, they're like urban planners, they're, running successful businesses. And I was just really curious what it would be like to sit on the other side of the table, kind of play a different role on really similar issues. So I went to business school here in DC and at Georgetown, really with that kind of pivot in mind. I didn't know what that would look like. And I bet, some of you may have that same experience of just like, here's sort of the hypothesis. I'm going to go test it and see like if a job fits that description that I'm kind of looking for. So I knew that I wanted to make a pivot. Being able to work at the Park Service was a really good kind of interim step for me, though, because I was looking at environmental jobs generally as something I felt really really strongly about, but I wasn't sure if that would look like energy or solar or something in a really different space than I was coming from. Park Service was this really fun opportunity to practice consulting skills, to practice applying business learnings in a really non-traditional setting, where the challenge we were trying to solve was, how do you protect something in perpetuity? You can't sell it off if something goes wrong. There's a lot of really unique challenges within that environment, which was great training for what I do now at QV, which is really, as a for-profit B Corp, we are, centering that impact within our business model. That's really important to our whole organization, but we are intentionally trying to make this a for-profit entity, to say that, you can work on these issues and support, consulting with nonprofits, for-profit companies, other local governments, large federal agencies, and so on, and make an impact through that work. So BPI was a really good interim step in that, but like the shifting from nonprofit structures to for-profit structures was something I really had in mind as part of my kind of transition point.
I love that you mentioned kind of how BPI helped you transition. That was actually my next question. So great segue. Lisa, I'll turn back to you and maybe state the question again. Was there something that you learned as a BPI, or skills that you practiced that maybe contributed to your decision to take your role at Google, or that continuously adds value to your current role?
Totally. Well, first I would start off by talking about working with the BMG. I think the BMG is staffed by mostly ex-consultants and many people who came from the private sector. So during my project, I just really saw the value of working with a manager who was familiar with best practices in everything from analytics to working in a very large and diverse organization and wrangling all the stakeholders, to kind of being concise with priorities and recommendations on coming up with strategic perspectives on how the organization could proceed. And so I think that is one factor that made me appreciate the private sector way of professional training. And I thought that it would be great to continue learning in a very fast-paced organization. And then I think the BPI itself was a great exposure into how different entities in environment and conservation work together. I had worked for an international development agency, which was multinational. The BPI internship worked with the NPS, which is federal government. And so I think that gave me some perspective into which organization, how or different organizations impact the conservation space. And now I'm working with nonprofits. So yeah, I think that was another factor. But overall, I think the BPI was just a great experience in understanding both how our natural resources in the US at least are managed. And I think I'll be building upon that as I kind of navigate my career going forward. A lot of things are still yet to be decided.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many different ways I tell people in info sessions, there's so many ways that this can play out on the back end, and you both are proof of that. And it's a continuous story, right? I even find that in my own career of things that I did years ago that I'm now so grateful for that experience that I didn't even realize at the time was valuable. So definitely a great point. So this is a little bit of a shift from talking kind of about the BPI and more about your role. And, one of the things that the Purposeful Growth Institute thinks about a lot is this idea of course, purposeful work. And what does that mean? And how in a lot of our conversations around the state of work and the future of work, there can be this sort of tension between profit and purpose. And it comes up a lot, right, in the for-profit space, right? Because there are these competing values sometimes. Is that something that you've experienced? We talk about it in terms of rose and thorn, right? So if they're being purpose driven, as you both are in the for-profit space, is there maybe a frustrating piece of that and a really satisfying counter to that in your specific roles or in your companies more broadly. I don't know who would like to take this one first. It's kind of a big question.
And I can give it a stab. I'm not sure if I have a great answer.
Go for it.
I mean, I think like the catch-22 that I come down to a lot is that a lot of my projects are trying to solve for funding and financing needs of projects that are inherently heavier on the impact side of things, and finding like the all the revenue streams that could back a loan, or the equity investors who are interested in impact first fund, or all the county governments who could pay into a fund that would help generate some, all these different structures that we look at really do come down to some tension between, what's your primary goal. And when we look at things that are more traditional, like trying to raise debt or raise equity for a really impact-oriented thing, we come up against some really traditional old school models, even for people who call themselves impact investors. Like, they're impact investors, but they're looking for a 10%, hurdle rate. It's like, okay, I would rather have, I'm looking for like 1% debt. Like, can you find me that? Like, that's how I'm going to make this work. And so I find that there is some tension kind of in that meeting, where things are still getting borne out as to what does this blended version of impact-oriented business look like, and how are people comfortable with the risks that accompany that. That's both really exciting, because we're sort of forging that space right now to say, okay, like program-related investments, really good tool, like state revolving funds, great tool for like these kind of low interest risk, interested, I guess, flirting with risk capital stacks. But it's really at that intersection of what can we create that sort of moves us into that direction. I think there is definitely a tension between purpose and profit, but I do, as I was thinking about this, reflecting before this meeting, is like the purpose of business is to solve for needs, and a lot of needs are really purpose driven. And so to think that those two things are like inextricably related, like there is a really important intersection of those things where we can do a lot of good work, whether that's in conservation finance, whereas I spend a lot of my time, or in something like marketing. Being able to get the word out about really important projects is inherently purpose driven, unless you're advertising something that's not. But like there's a lot of value in places where people don't necessarily use the word like environment, impact, like the buzzwords we associate with philanthropy. We're sort of breaking down those barriers now.
Yeah, I think that sets you up, Lisa, really well. The two call outs for advertising and marketing, and bridging some of these spaces. What are your thoughts on that balance? Because you're even in an even larger company, right? So it might be more of a challenge, or maybe less of a challenge. I'm not actually sure. Would love to hear what your experience has been.
Yeah, totally. I think, Amie, your general point about like just having to, like the economy having to design for customers and to solve problems, like really resonates. Like somebody has to solve these problems. And for us, it is digital marketing. And like we serve all customers, right? Like, I mean, with some constraints, everybody can be served. Like we design marketing platforms that are used by our biggest for-profit companies, like the biggest retailers you can name, but as well, but a lot of those profits get funneled into programs that we use to serve smaller customers. Like the Google Ads for Nonprofits program is funded by our for-profit side. It's what Western Rivers uses, our $10,000 in free credits every month. So a lot of nonprofits are benefiting highly from the platform regardless. So I would say it is important for me overall in life to feel like I'm doing net good. And I think building product is a tech product, at least at Google, is, like building the best product is something that I don't have moral qualms against. And I think overall the company is very sensitive about integrity and how we handle user data and what type of content is permitted versus not permitted. I would say, like, even as someone interested in purpose, like for all of us, like we're on this call because we're interested in making some type of positive impact. We can't ignore the for-profit economy because it's going to exist no matter what. And the best we can do is understand it and be an actor with integrity within that space. I would also say that purpose is pretty personal. And for some, like purpose is like innovation and designing the best, technology or products or systems, or making the best investments. And perhaps in Amie's case, and it's important to just reflect on what purpose is defined as for yourself, and work on optimizing that. Yeah, and I think this definition of purpose also changes over time. I think what I considered doing good in the past is slightly different from what I consider now. Yeah, that's sort of my POV.
I think that's such great advice. I think I'll actually add a follow-up to that, because my next question was about what companies can do to create more impact. But I think you make a great point about it being really personal. I'd love to hear a little bit more from you both about how you've sort of crafted that sense of purpose in yourself and how that translates to your work. Like, what does it mean for you to do purposeful work in the space that you do? And then if you'd like to add something about of advice for companies or organizations. But I think for this group specifically, that crafting that sense of personal purpose is probably equally valuable. So would love to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you for bringing it up. I'll give you a break, Lisa, if you want to think about it.
Yeah, I can go first. For me, I think there's a couple different layers to it. I think, I alluded to, I sort of decided on this environment being a kind of a North Star for me during business school, where I did a lot of reflecting on what purpose meant to me. Working within that space felt like, that was what would be purposeful, and whatever role I took within that, I was a little bit more agnostic to, much to the dismay of our career department, who was like, tell me something really specific where I can plug it into some models we understand. So I think there's, just deciding what matters to you and using that as a North Star is like a really powerful piece in the first place. I did an exercise where I just looked up, for me, I was looking for, powerful women in business whose roles I admired, kind of worked backwards. What kind of experiences did they have? And, it really gave me a good respect for people whose paths go all over the place, and that you can find purpose in a lot of different roles. And I was coming out of the nonprofit space where I was feeling, I think what a lot of people in nonprofits feel, which is a little bit of martyrdom for your cause, of saying the value that you're providing into the space is not equivalent to like the financial compensation or the value people put you on equal footing with enormous companies versus small nonprofit, despite the impact they're generating is really meaningful. So I was looking for, I will probably return to that space. I find deep purpose in the nonprofit space, but was trying to find something similar in a for-profit entity. So it was sort of the context in which I was considering all of this. And then I think Lisa's point just about the like entrepreneurship, or, all these different, there's like the structures and how you do stuff, which is also for me really purpose driven. So we're a small company, we're probably 7 or 8 years old, but we're still very much, building and growing actively. So I find a lot of purpose in the building of systems and kind of making a company's vision come to life and being able to contribute to that internal operational piece. And it's certainly very different than like planting a tree, which feels, like very tangibly purpose driven. You can like feel it, versus like building a spreadsheet that like helps you track an invoice more effectively. But like, if that's what gets the latter thing done, like those are really important pieces. And I find a lot of purpose in both of those kind of orientations.
That's so great. Lisa, what about you?
Yeah, for me personally, I think having an impact on the environment space is also very important. And I think business school is great as like a reflective platform. Did a lot of reflection as well. Right now, I'm looking at my life holistically. I know I work in a marketing unit of a business. And so it's important for me, outside of like my nine to whatever job, to have something that I can feel proud of, and feel like I'm contributing to from a skill set perspective. But within the workplace, I agree. It's also about how an organization does work and being part of that. I think I really like working at Google because I feel like it's an organization that respects its people and respects each other. And so I feel I can show up to work on a day-to-day basis and be part of a very integrity, again, using that word, driven organization. And I hope that we can, both in our operating model as well as in some of our business decisions, be an example for the rest of industry. I think Google is doing a lot, both in the way that we're conserving water and conserving and generating renewable energy and making investments in carbon, and also some of the direct projects that we're doing in environmental space, like our geos team, our maps team is doing a lot for cities, and everything from that to like smart homes. I think it's an organization that I think, to your question on what can organizations do, I think there's always like something you can do to increase impact. But even like beyond those products, I think I appreciate working in organizations that's dedicated to doing the best for our customers. We have made recommendations to our customers that would reduce their spend on our platform because it's the best choice for them. So I think this model of integrity is something that's important to me. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you both make a really great point of how creating impact can be maybe like a step or two removed from what feels like direct impact, and that's just equally value and meaning. And there's such meaning to it as well, whether it's product or company policies and practices. Like there's so many ways to find purpose, no matter what the sector is. Do you have any advice for folks who are considering a career in the sector of how they can kind of screen for those type of like I actually love the use of the word integrity, of like, how can you screen for like purpose and integrity in a company when you're out on interviews, and you are, as Amie said, kind of agnostic to the form itself, but you just want to have a role that does have that meaning and purpose. How do you suggest that people seek that out, or identify it in an interview process? And whoever wants to jump in on this one.
Sure. Well, maybe I'll jump in here because I've thought about screening organizations in the past. Like something really important for me is like two things. One is just talking to the people in the organization. I would say like whenever you're exploring organizations, like meet the people and see if their values align with yours. And then beyond the employees, like also look at the leadership. For me, it's like really important that I respect the leadership of the company, and I like want to work in places where like the leadership are people who I want to emulate, not just professionally, but also personally. I think a lot of those values trickle down into how organizations operate. And like looking at leadership, I've worked with like people who are just great at running their teams and, respect their teams a lot, treat them like people, are just like focused on empowering others, like are just like kind and fun and all of that. Many of them like volunteer outside of their day jobs, in various capacities. And many of them also like give back financially. I should have mentioned that earlier. I think like if you're not directly working in an organization, there's also an opportunity to like just give, whether that's via your time or with your resources, like financial resources. And you can always like rally other people around you to give as well. So anyway, but to this question, I think you can see a lot about an organization's values and philosophy from their employees and leadership.
Yeah, that's a great point there. And Amie, anything you would add in terms of that process?
But nothing groundbreaking. I mean, I really do think it comes down to like knowing how you define purpose for yourself, and then vetting for it as you go, and then taking stock with yourself as you go of like how important it is to me that you're like 100% maxed out in this type of purpose. And if it's not in like the mission to do something that's like explicitly impact oriented, is it like net positive for the thing you're interested in? Does the like employee impact resonate in a certain way? Does the culture impact XYZ? Just thinking about where you need to prioritize and where you're not willing to compromise. is helpful, because I think, as Lisa was saying, your life is greater than your job, and how you define yourself and your life's purpose should go beyond that. But in looking for how your job fits into that, make sure that you're not, leaning too much on your life to kind of compensate for your job, if having purpose in your job is really important to you, because you're going to do it a lot for the next, X number of years, and being able to make sure that those really drive you is helpful, and finding value in your day-to-day from whatever piece of the business gives you value is something you'll have to really reflect on personally. But that was really important to me, to say, this aligns with my personal values, this aligns with my sense of purpose, this aligns with my, whatever it is, checks a lot of boxes. I feel really comfortable with this choice. And then test it, because you might not know until you get there. And if it's not that, then, find something else. You don't have to do your job forever. You can do a different job.
That's true. There's a lot of hypothesizing that probably goes down an early career. So well taken point. So we're going, in a few minutes, we're going to do some Q&A with everyone that's here. But I wanted to kind of leave some space for maybe like a closing thought from both of you as to anything that hasn't come up yet around advice or insights that you would give to those that are here and who may listen after, about how you can create an impactful career. I think you've done a great job of talking about how you can create impact wherever you are. But if there's something that maybe I haven't asked yet that you think is really valuable to this conversation, now is the time. So maybe Lisa, would you like to answer that one first?
Sure. Yeah, I guess one concluding piece of advice or thought that I have is that I think it's easy as someone who cares and has worked in the impact space to perceive like a long-term career and impact as like working in a nonprofit or like working in the government. And I don't think that necessarily has to be the case. I think there's different ways to have a positive impact that, again, I think we both believe is like very personally defined. And so I think someone who's like running a nonprofit can be just as impactful as like the donor that's like their biggest donor that finances that entire project, right? And so just like think about like different ways to leave a mark in the world. It could be personal, it could be professional. Yeah, it could be like the way you interact with the people around you and how you like rally people to action. It could be by like building certain like unique skill sets, like for example, like in finance, in Amie's case, and being able to apply those skill sets in unique ways. Or it could be directly dedicating your time to an organization that you think is mission aligned. Yeah, so many different paths. And it's something that like I think is worth like reflecting on continually like throughout your life.
Yes, it's an ongoing journey. Amie, what about you?
Something I've been talking with my manager a lot recently is just the kind of network that I want to cultivate within my space. And it's had me also reflecting on just the ways in which I've been building the network of like-minded kind of purpose-driven people throughout my career. And so, it's a next step for me at my current role to think, who should I be able to call and speed dial? Who are the people I really want to have as my go-tos to drive more impact at my current role? But I do think that, the broader point of knowing who is your impact network, however you want to define that, or your purpose network, is really powerful, because those people can hold you to account when you go to something and you're like, I don't know if this aligns with like my sense of purpose or what I'm looking to do, or like, can I talk through how I feel about this kind of thing? That group, which, graduate school in general is really powerful for, can help you kind of keep that aligned in your career in the way that feels really important to you. And I think being able to call people and say, hey, this type of role looks really interesting because it's checking these boxes for me. Like, just keep those people in mind who will advocate for you and who also understand what drives your purpose, because that's ultimately the most valuable part of your career, is being able to connect with people who find a lot of value and purpose, to overuse the word, in spaces that you do. And I think that's going to help, center and drive a lot more meaningful work if people kind of hold those two things at the center.
I love that. Thank you both. At this time, I'd love to invite anyone that has a question to, you can use the raised hand button and I'll call on you, and you can pose your question to our lovely panelists here. Let's see, Jing.
Hi, Kellen. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
Thanks. And thank you so much, panelists Amie and Lisa. Very candid and great insights. I have a question, and I'm just going to be like safe space here. So currently I'm pursuing an MBA, and I told everybody that along the way that I'm doing an MBA because I want to fight climate change, kind of do it at a scaled manner. And what I quickly found out, so I think because of me and a few people in our program who are more like impact oriented, people started to learn more about ESG. But I personally have like a kind of almost like a cynical feeling toward ESG, not in the sense that it's useless, but in the sense that up till this point, it is still very much a not like super critical type of work, which is becoming more and more critical. And folks kind of just direct, would you be interested in ESG? It's like almost like a automatic reaction every time when you share that with them. So like, I'm just thinking on two lanes, like what would be like a best approach to respond to those kindness, but that don't necessarily understand the impact space, and also how to like use that almost like as a kindling to push further like the idea of impact among those who try to lend a helping hand. Thank you.
I'm happy to give my answer, at least from the kind of financial side of things, because I think that's where ESG comes up a lot. I mean, I think it's a useful framework, and I had a similar experience where a lot of my classmates, like, if anything came up with like trees or like environment, they'd all be like, go ask Amie, like, we don't really understand it, but like we hear that she's interested in that. And, that's fine. That's how they're going to operate in like 99% of their career. And if I become the person that they say, like, we heard it's about trees, go talk to Amie, like, great, that is going to help move someone in my direction. I think for ESG in particular, like, people will use that as like a band-aid to not have to understand it any deeper. And some people will use that and that will be useful, and some people won't, and that's fine. But as long as, I think from your side, educating back of like, that comprises a lot of ideas. I'm really interested in the environmental piece of it, but the social and governance components of it are really fascinating too. Like, can we break that down a little bit more? Or if they're trying to pass you ESG careers, they might just not fully understand what they're saying, but have the right intention of saying, I think this is social impact, environmental impact, like the business school buzzword is ESG. I'm just going to use that. So for me, it was just like, a way to kind of screen what people were trying to tell me. And I kind of generally knew that it was well-intentioned, and generally they kind of understood it was in my wheelhouse. So I don't know if that's useful for you, but the ways that we can provide better tools back to our classmates who are not impact oriented, so that when they go out into their corners of the world and are doing investment banking and management consulting and not thinking about ESG at all, can we be that little voice in the back of their head to like remind them that impact does have a place at the table, and it takes a lot of different forms, and hopefully, your face will pop up into their head every once in a while.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, I echo Amy's opinion that it's usually well-intentioned. And I think it's a reflection of people who are newer to the space. Like, if you're not familiar with the space, then ESG is like the first concept you go to. So it's not, I don't think it's malicious. And I think it's a great entry point as well. I think like when it comes to ESG, it's always important to like dig a little bit deeper and to become an expert in whatever area you're working in. And so in these types of conversations, I don't know if it's immediately possible in the conversation, if it's a follow-up, or if it's something that to keep in mind once people are actually engaged in an organization. But like I would always be oriented to like looking at the underlying data and making sure like any impact that they make are justified by the data. I think once you start looking into the specifics, like the truth comes out as to like, is this like really the most high value thing you can do? But I hold the opinion that everything is additional. Like if you otherwise wouldn't be involved in environmental or social or governance, and you decide to like do something at your falling under your organization's like ESG bucket, then like great. And hopefully that's an entry point to like deepen your understanding of a certain impact space. But yes, if I think in terms of like defending impact, I think comparing like data is like the most compelling approach.
Great
Awesome. Thank you so
question
much.
and great answers as well. Thank you. Natalie, you have your hand up. What's your question?
Hi, thank you so much for this information. It was super helpful. I was just wondering, in moments where you're maybe feeling a little discouraged because you're not seeing the impact that you'd hoped for, if you have any helpful strategies for staying motivated and persevering in your purpose-driven work.
I thought about this, so like maybe I'll jump into like one quick thought. I think when you're become really passionate and fired up about a cause, it's very easy to want to immediately like do the most. But what I've learned over the years is like we all, I think there are limitations in what we can achieve as an individual person. And I think making a really significant impact, even in a smaller space, is meaningful. And at the end of the day, it is like collective action that is necessary to make like a big change. So I would say that as long as you're moving things forward in some way, then to not beat yourself up about it, and to also just like identify the causes that you do like care about the most, that you are working on, your passion area, to use a very corny word. But I think, it is very important to be realistic. And then once you become an expert in a space, it becomes easier to understand how to like increase the scale of your impact. Like for me, I'm thinking a lot about like moving from like rallying gifts and donations from like my colleagues to engaging like my peers in the Bay Area in a much higher way, and like figuring out like who should I target first to engage in the environmental space. And I also had a recent conversation with one of my, I guess, like partners, colleagues at Western Rivers Conservancy. And it's also important to work on things that fire yourself up, because you're in it, like it's a long game for you. And I wouldn't force yourself to do things or work on things that don't have inherent motivation for you, because you might burn out. And so sometimes you may have to sacrifice slight numbers to like work on something that you're like zestful about. And I think that's okay, because you'll continue on over the years.
Yeah, I mean, I think about this a lot, so I appreciate the question. I mean, there's a lot of incremental progress is hard, just in general. People like would prefer to see fast change and would prefer to see stuff that we see as, a crisis or a real turning point for humanity, and groups that are burdened at really different rates than others. It's really hard to bear witness to how much is happening in the world. And I think it's important just like hold and acknowledge that, particularly if you're interested in environmental and social impact. But I think, that, identifying what motivates you and why it motivates you and what's going to keep you going when, you lose a grant, or you see some disaster happen, or you witness something really unjust, like within your work or otherwise. For me, it's really coming back to like, why do I do this work? How comfortable do I feel with the position I've taken in giving myself agency to address it? And you're not always going to have that, but I think the 2 steps forward, 1 step back, being able to really focus on the 1 step net gain is where I draw a lot of change in my life. And I remember when I first started at QV, our CEO, Eric, like in the interview process was just like, how comfortable are you having like 1 or 2 bad days a week? Like, this is not easy work. Can you live with that? And he's like, 2 bad days in a row, but the third day is like really good. And like, that gets me out of bed every day. That's why I do this. And I think, I think I have fewer bad days than that, just not to scare people out from impact. But I do think being able to like reconcile with yourself, like, what's your threshold? Like, what are you willing to carry with you every day? And how many good days do you need to have? And if you can't, not burn out with the number of bad days you're looking at, it's worth reevaluating where that kind of drive comes from. But I do think that, that's also where that network of impact peers is really important, because they'll be able to remind you of like where your center is, why you're doing it, and what kind of progress you've made when you can't see that in retrospect. You're really focused on that one step you lost.
Yeah, that's a great insight. Thank you, Amie. Samantha, what's your question?
Yeah, just want to echo the thank yous. This has been awesome and candid, and really appreciate your time, but was just curious to hear about kind of how your experiences over the summer at the national parks kind of influenced or informed your perspective and journey through for-profit and nonprofit spaces and public and private spaces, just kind of what that summer really did for you guys, and if there's anything else you did throughout your degrees that kind of helped you find your journey as we're trying to navigate this as well.
I don't care. I am happy to start, because my internship project was really, I had never done consulting before. So, just big picture, being able to practice this consulting skill set with, as Lisa said, like pretty seasoned consultants managing me was like, was huge. Because my project was focused on private businesses operating within the canyon and kind of how they got permits. There was a lot of really interesting kind of statistical analysis we could do, just to think we had tons and tons of permit data from everyone who's ever gone into the canyon, basically on a permit for backpacking, and had kind of the corollary story of what permitting on the river looked like. If you've ever tried to go whitewater rafting down Grand Canyon, it's a challenging process because it's really, really coveted. So they've instituted some permitting policies there that basically half of them go to guides and half of them are up for a lottery. And, they were trying to decide, we don't really want to end up there with the backpacking projects. How do we manage this so that we're managing for National Park Service goals and also the needs that we're seeing on the ground? And I think what I really took away from that, other than like the ability to practice some statistical modeling, the ability to do some case studies with other parks, kind of to provide more insight to park management, was just, we created a Macy framework, as I think they really like to do, trying to think through, consulting frameworks. Are you answering every question? Where do you need to focus? How do you prioritize? And just the rigor of creating a framework, using skills that were really highly applicable in a lot of different settings, and then just having a peek behind the curtain of the public sector in a way that I had never experienced before. Though I'm now partnering with the Forest Service, I do get kind of a glimpse again, but just how they worked was really important too. So all of those different pieces for me left me feeling like I really like the consulting, business work. I was not convinced of that going into business school. I completely wrote off consulting and then actually went into consulting. So big impact on my life there. Enjoyed working with public agencies, but found that the pace and kind of that entrepreneurial piece that I really like about my current job wasn't evident in that particular part of working within a park, maybe within a BMG, but I wanted something fast paced and something that I could build kind of on my own. So that was sort of a differentiating factor for me there. But just being able to work with really smart people who like cared really deeply was one of the most important things. And I think you can look at a lot of jobs where, I was looking at finance at an energy company and was saying, what's that like? And the person I talked to was like, it's a bunch of finance people whose work is energy. And I wanted people who were like environment conservation nerds whose work was finance and conservation, kind of flipping that. and being able to be at the Park Service and kind of see who I wanted my peer group to be was hugely valuable for that as well. Hopefully that rambling story is useful.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, for me, a lot of what Amie said like resonates highly. I mean, if I were to add to that, I would just say, I think working in the government is just an awesome experience because it helps you understand like how the world runs and why we need to have government versus private business and how they collaborate together. I think I got a good point of view of like the different types of constraints that organizations have or don't have. Like one pro of the federal government, so the National Park Service, is that they have these like continual budgets that like come every single year. And the systems don't change very much. Like we have like a very fixed program, and that ensures sort of like a continuity of the resources and services that the National Park Service provides to its people. And there isn't a lot of risk of like, oh, this, you know, Yosemite is now going to go out of business because it's not getting enough visitation. I mean, that's not a problem for Yosemite, but maybe for one of the smaller parks. So I think there's sort of like a more rigorous, like values-oriented mechanism of investment, and then it's like very like durable. Whereas like in the for-profit sector, like market factors that like determine everything. If customers don't like something, oh, we're going to get rid of it. Like if your customers go away, then the business is going to go out of business. And then when you think about the environmental space, I think it makes me like understand why we need to have like, we both need to have like, you know, state governments and city governments that are determining energy policy and investments and directing companies into different areas, like investing in solar or like investing in like water retention technology. But you also need like to have companies out there where like they're competing to provide the best and cheapest technology. And if they don't, then they'll go out of business. But that sort of like pushes us towards like the best possible solution. So I think like working for the public sector was for me like very rewarding and just like more fully understanding how the world works. And yeah, just like having an informed perspective.
Yeah. I'll add that from my year, I think I want to say 4, maybe 5 people from my BPI class work for the Park Service now. And like, it's something I considered really, really deeply. I think it's a fabulous opportunity. And like, I think people find truly meaningful careers with a really, really cool skill set that they use every day in those jobs. And so, you know, also the opportunity to meet other BPI people was like very cool. So that's my hard plug there, because I really, like, one of my BPI classmates lives down the block from me and she and I are very good friends. It's, you know, it's a very cool community to be able to be exposed to.
Oh yeah, I would just like second and third and fourth that. Like the BPI community was incredible. Like I've gone on backpacking trips after our internship. Like I just went to one of the weddings of our BPI classmates. Like one of my BPI classmates like stays at my place like whenever she's in San Francisco. So it's an amazing community. Really fun people.
People are going to think that Samantha is a plant, that I placed in the audience to ask that question last, because that's a great kind of conclusion to our time together. I think I was jotting some notes down as you were both kind of sharing your answers to that last question, and the idea of a rigorous, values-oriented experience with a network of impact peers is a really great way to summarize the BPI experience. So thank you both for sharing your perspectives on that and all of the things that we discussed this evening. Thanks so much for your time, and thanks to all of you for joining us. On the screen, you can see that QR code that just takes you to our main application page. The recording to this webinar will be added to that page once it's available, and there are links to register to some of the other webinars we have upcoming. We're about a month away from the application deadline, so if you're still considering that, would love to encourage you further. I hope this conversation has influenced you as well, and we just appreciate all of you for being here. So thank you so much. Have a great evening, everyone.